Welcome. You're listening to a Trauma Survivor Thrivers podcast on Mental Health News Radio Network. Thank you for joining us for Trauma Survivor Thrivers podcast. Hope everyone is enjoying the new year. I'm Lori Lee Binstock, host of a Trauma Survivor Thrivers podcast. We are on Mental Health News Radio Network and really anywhere you get your podcast. Today's guest is Sam Kabert. He is a serial entrepreneur turned certified breathwork practitioner and keynote speaker. He is the author of the best-selling book Soul Life Balance and host of the Soul Seeker podcast. Sam spent the early part of his career chasing success and was named to Silicon Valley's 40 Under 40 at just 31 years old. In the past 5 years, he's courageously embraced a transformative path of self-discovery, centering his focus on prioritizing mental health. Sam is on a mission to offer tools to overcome overwhelm and encourage the rise of compassionate leadership to eradicate the glorification of hustle culture. Sam, thank you so much for joining me today.
Yeah, Laura Lee, I'm so stoked to be here and see where this takes us.
Well, it's funny. When I first connected with you, I think we connected on LinkedIn, and I at this time I had spoken to a couple people who mentioned 5-MeO DMT, which is basically a psychedelic toad venom that is taken for healing. But I'll let you talk about that a little bit. But when I talked to you, I was like, this is like the third person who's mentioned this. Maybe I need to try it. And, I've heard of it prior at conferences, but I was actually terrified to try it. Um, but then after I spoke to you, I found a practitioner just looking for someone, just for my own, therapy. And I was like, this is just a sign. I have to do it. And I reached out to you and I asked you about it, and you actually had information on YouTube about it. So I'd like you to explain a little bit about what 5-MeO DMT is, if you could.
Yeah, absolutely. Happy to. So Bufo, the Bufo alvarius toad, also known as the Colorado River toad or the Sonoran Desert toad, that's the toad itself. And this isn't like Family Guy where it's like licking the toad. I mean, I think a lot of people in recent years have started to hear about Bufo, and there's some reclassifications of the name. So I hear a lot of people just referring to it as simply five, short for 5-MeO DMT or perhaps toad medicine. But to back up, this is the molecule specifically is 5-MeO DMT. And I like to start with the distinction between this and what we can call quote unquote traditional DMT. Because for years, people have been talking about DMT and the machine elves and going through the portal or the wormhole or things like that. And 5-MeO, in my experience in working with it so intimately and helping others to integrate their experience and just being a part of probably 1,000 ceremonies at this point over the past 4 or 5 years, I would say it's very different than DMT. Most of what is unique to 5-MeO is it's a very healing medicine, and it's not recreational use because I think a lot of times, at least in my little center of the world or corner of the world, I hear DMT more being reported like a cool trip, and while any of these medicines can be used as kind of for exploring consciousness, like psychonauts for sure. Um, Most people that seem to be called to Bufo is for what your podcast is all about, trauma, PTSD, things like that. And I'll pause there because I mean, I'm going to ramble and tell you everything I know about if I keep going.
I mean, I'd love that because I feel like there's not enough information online about it. And, That is interesting that you said it because when I mentioned it to my friends when I first did it, they were like, "Okay, you're crazy." I think they think just my level of psychedelic use for healing. I've done it with practitioners. Like you mentioned, 5-MeO is a lot different. It's not something you want to go to a party and take,
Yeah.
right? Like that would just like kill the mood, I feel like.
Yeah, it's funny too. Like the deeper I go, I don't know if you've experienced this, but at least for me personally, the deeper I go in like medicine ceremonies, the idea of recreational use of, say, mushrooms is less and less appealing. I don't want to say like going on a hike with a little bit of mushrooms has been ruined for me, but for a lot of the times, like now, at the times that I have, you know, been working with mushrooms more recreationally, say outdoors and going for a hike, it's like, oh shoot, we're dropping straight into doing the work. Like I thought this could just be relaxing and just kind of giggly or fun. But it's almost like my psyche now equates medicine going straight into it. And I do think the times that I hear of people like passing around a DMT vape pen at parties, I might have a little bit of judgment there because what comes up for me is like, that is ridiculous. Uh, but yeah, I agree with that. So I could keep going about 5-MeO if you'd like.
Well, yeah, actually, could you? And then I'd like to talk about how you were exposed to it too, and our experiences there.
Yeah, so when I first heard about Bufo, I was terrified as well. I haven't gone back to listen to this podcast episode, but I had someone on my podcast who mentioned it, and I was like, "Oh man, that sounds like too much. I don't know if I'd ever do that." And it was probably a few months later after I did, then I did. I became really good friends with this woman through a fellowship mastermind that I met, and she was beginning to serve the medicine. She had been studying for a number of years underneath her mentor, who she proudly says he's served more 5-MeO than anyone on the planet, and I believe that Dr. John definitely has a very well-respected reputation within the field as well. So she uh, mentored under him, and she just asked me if I wanted to start assisting her in ceremony. And that's how I was initially exposed. That was after I had sat with the medicine with both of them. And that was nearly, yeah, it was 4 years ago, this time of year at the time of recording. And then I spent the next several years traveling quite a few places in the nation outside of the country as well, and in different parts with ceremonies. But in terms of like what 5-MeO DMT, where it comes from, the Bufo toad. There's a lot of different names for it. One of them is the Sonoran Desert toad, and that's because it comes from the Sonoran Desert, which is in parts of Arizona and parts of Mexico. And the story, at least, is that the Seri tribe, who are like the keepers of the medicine, if you will, they work with the medicine kind of like a rite of passage for their youth. When they turn 13 or so, it's a rite of passage. And when asked where how they discovered it, they were told that the star people informed them. And I think most people that have experienced Bufo, they do feel more connected, like galactically, if you will, as opposed to like mushrooms and ayahuasca being a little bit more of the earth. And all this to say, there's the toad, and it spends about 9 to 10 months out of the year underground, and then it comes out during storms, which I believe is around like July. And then they excrete a little bit of this venom from the cheek, and they put it on a glass sheet, and then they let it crystallize, and then you smoke it, which is so wild. So when we hear like, oh, the star people told us about it, it's like, yeah, that checks out. Yeah, that makes sense. It's kind of like with ayahuasca with thousands of different plants in the Amazon, and they mix two different ones to get the brew. How'd you hear about that? Oh, our village was sick and we were shown in a village or in a vision to do this. Can't
Mhm.
argue that, you know? Yeah.
Wow. And that's really interesting when you say it's like a galactic feeling because I it does when people talk about it they all they're like it's a rocket ship like you just blast off which there was a point for me and I don't know how if this is like the standard because I haven't talked to a lot of people about it but it was I was taking a low dose and then I would inhale it through a pen. And then, I'd have my 15 or so minutes. And then I would do it again, like a higher dose and a higher dose until I think it was like, it was about an hour and a half of total. Um, and it was gradual. It was at first I was like, oh, this isn't bad at all. But then my last hit of the pen, I don't even know where I went, but I didn't feel like I was there. But my body was convulsing and moaning and what it felt like as I was like blasting off that all of the trauma that I feel was trapped in my body was leaving my body. It was this very I wasn't scared because I felt like I was very open to however, like I've heard scary stories like, oh, it's like, and I don't even know if those are true, but I wasn't scared. I'm assuming someone who probably has never tried any psychedelic would be terrified. Like, why am I going to die screaming and moaning and like allowing my body to just do what it needs to do? Um, but what was really interesting and powerful to me, because I was told I can drive after this, was that as soon as the 15 minutes were up after that intense um, experience, I felt n- I felt better than I could even explain. I felt like I can do anything and not like, oh, I'm good. I can literally just, not like a person who's just like I'm the ruler of this world. No, I was very much like I can walk. I feel clear-headed. I feel like a lot of weight has been lifted off of my entire body and I can drive and I know exactly what I'm doing. Um, as opposed to other psychedelics where like LSD would take 10 hours, mushrooms would take 4 to 5 hours. And so that's what I found very, very therapeutic about I didn't feel like kind of hungover, like and I think that's a myth that a lot of people have when they talk about like, oh, psychedelics, like, don't you feel terrible afterwards? Like as if I was drinking alcohol. And I'm like, no, you're not really supposed to. If you're drinking and, and such and taking, mushrooms or LSD or anything like that, you may feel hungover from the alcohol. Um, but what was your experience when you tried 5-MeO for the first time?
Yeah, thank you for sharing all that as well. And it's so wild how quickly it metabolizes. And sometimes, in terms of like working with psychedelics, not necessarily like even with Bufo too, I call it an energetic hangover because, like, with Bufo, to your point, like it metabolizes so quickly, and it's like you feel more clear a lot of times. And sometimes people are just like all smiles and amazing. Other times people almost are like in their shit a lot, and myself as well. And so this heavy type feeling, and I relate it to like a breathwork journey. A lot of times after I facilitate breathwork journeys, but when I have my own as an attendee, I'm like, I kind of need my space and I feel a little gentle and fragile. And that's where it feels more like a energetic uh, hangover. And you mentioned like the convulsing, the first, not, I don't know if it was the first time I did Bufo, but it, I think it happens with me quite frequently. I will like vibrate so
Hmm.
much, and I've had that experience a lot with breath work as well, releasing the trauma in that regard. I think the first several times that I sat with the medicine, I was still learning. I was still in this place of like gaslighting myself. And basically, for me, I experienced the medicine as in like time not existing, and that like you are God, I am God, like we're all one, like the actual feeling of oneness. And the mind can't really conceptualize that and understand that. Like we can read all the spiritual texts and be like, oh yeah, I believe this. And Bufo provides that knowing because it's that felt experience. Yeah. And I remember coming back after my third ceremony of sitting with Bufo, which I think I've had 15 now at this point. But after that third one, um, looking at the facilitator and being like, wow, it really is just all the Truman Show. This whole human experience is like the Truman Show. And that's kind of what it felt like. And even saying that's kind of weird. Like being like, well, I remember that movie from Jim Carrey, but you mean there's a show going about you? And I don't mean that, but it's almost like everyone's like a character, it's gets into simulation theory, and you can look at different movies or whatever your spiritual specific beliefs and how you resonate with that. But for me, it's really that feeling that wow, I am constantly creating my reality. And as I integrate this medicine, it's more important than ever that I be intentional with my thoughts and feelings, because so often with manifestation, we talk about the positive side of manifestation. Like, what are you calling into your life? But where I see troubles with the integration of Bufo with myself, but very much so with clients and people working with it, is going into a negative spiral. Because a lot of times, like, say you're someone who experiences a lot of depression, or maybe it's anxiety or whatever it is. Oftentimes, that's going to intensify in the integration. So you can have that felt experience of moving through your life with it so that you can move through it. And then that's when it's so easy to get sucked into old patterns of like victim mentality. And then now you're doing what I call a negative manifestation, because you're just in that lower frequency, and Bufo opens up your manifestations at a faster rate.
Wow. You mentioned something about gaslighting yourself. And I feel like that's something that a lot of people do. Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, to me, gaslighting's like when we just are doubting something that comes through. Like it's as it relates to a medicine ceremony. Like we'll stay there first. Like my first night with ayahuasca, I remember being like at the end of the ceremony. Yeah, but that can't really be real, because the mind, the ego is coming back, and it's getting you to second guess what you just experienced. And then on a day-to-day basis, a lot of times that self-gaslighting is like self-doubt, inner critic, or maybe it's someone listening that's working with IFS, internal family systems, and they're doing
Hmm.
parts work. And if you're doing parts work, then you can start to move beyond self-gaslighting, because you can understand when those parts aren't actually like your true authentic self.
Yes. And I love that you said internal family systems therapy because I know internal family systems therapy is such a huge is such a huge resource, if you are going to try any of these medicines. Um, because like you said, like you know exactly where these different parts are going, where your worry part may be coming from, and there's you can learn to not doubt yourself and not to be scared of these parts because I think that was the worry was I was going to be terrified of what may come up. But my practitioner, even when I was doing, I did MDMA assisted therapy first because I think there was worry that, I'm a childhood sexual abuse survivor, that it would be in that I would be I would be living my trauma. And with MDMA, it kind of shuts down that fear, anxiety part of your brain. And so I was able to look at everything with more compassion. But then, I moved on to psilocybin, mushroom assisted therapy. And, that really changed and helped me not be scared because some scary stuff came up there. And I felt like I was welcoming it. And I felt like I was questioning, okay, what is this telling me? And I think that is the key and not gaslighting yourself, like you were just saying with IFS or internal family systems therapy.
Yeah, and I love how you brought in like, what is this telling me? Like, what's the lesson? What's it revealing to me? There's a simple breath process that I use to help people, whether it's going through medicine ceremonies, integrating them, or just managing day-to-day emotions. And breath is an acronym. And the third step is the letter E, and it's energy to reveal. So it's like, okay, if emotions are energy in motion, what is this energy revealing to me? And this is the piece of the shadow work, you know?
Mm, wow. Yeah, well, actually, I think that is really important because do you incorporate breath work with these journeys, these 5-MeO journeys?
Yeah, I don't facilitate 5-MeO journeys. I assist in them, and not as much these days. But sometimes, depending on who's sitting there, like we might do a little bit of breath work before. We do these days called full immersion days, and in the morning I'll lead a breath work journey, and then after that combo, and then bufo, and then mushrooms to integrate at the night. And I've had
Wow.
those where I was a participant, and those have been so impactful for me. I'd say like as much as an ayahuasca ceremony.
Wow. Say that again. What is that full immersion day?
It's one day. So in the morning, we kick it off with breath work, a true breath work journey, which that the first time I ever did a breath work journey was before I ever did a medicine ceremony. And I literally felt reborn from the breath work journey. I feel like breath work and 5-MeO take you to very similar places, more than any other medicine that I've found. So breath work journeys can be a great way to integrate 5-MeO as well. So for these full immersion days, we're kicking it off with that, with the breathwork journey, which is enough in itself. And then combo. So anyone that's sat with the frog, that's a detox cleanser, and that's a big experience in itself. And then obviously Bufo is like top of the mountain in its own right, for sure. And then in the evening, it's a mushroom journey to integrate, and it's just a light dose of mushrooms. It's only about 2 grams, and different stuff mixed with it, with like passion flower and some other things in it. But what we find is most people are almost like a board, when they're lying there in their mat, because their nervous system has gone through so much. And mushrooms are a beautiful way to integrate bufo, because bufo leaves you feeling like, what the fuck, whatever just happened. That's what we hear most common with people coming out of it. Like, what just happened? And maybe not as a little bit more colorful language. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
so the mushrooms, just the slightest amount, and after everything you've been through in the day, like you're just at a place of surrender, and you're able to piece it all back together, and it really helps to integrate the process.
That's fascinating. What a day that is.
Yeah.
Do you do work to integrate all of that afterwards?
Yeah, absolutely. So, as you know, I have that YouTube playlist that's totally free. I think it's like it's several videos about Bufo. I also have an online community called Breath Club, which is completely free for people to join, where I teach them how to regulate their nervous system. And then my own thing I have as well is private coaching and an online course and whatnot called Structured Flow. I'm really excited about the coaching breakthrough sessions I'm doing now. It's called MER, mental emotional release, and it gets to the root of trauma. And a lot of the clients I work with too aren't even working with psychedelics. We're just going straight to the unconscious and rewiring the neural pathways.
How difficult is it to get into your subconscious when you're not doing psychedelics?
That's a great question. I'm glad you asked that. And I think there's a lot of misunderstandings with the subconscious or unconscious, interchangeable there. But this goes back to the self-gaslighting, right? Because if when we're leading through like an exercise, like MER is also called timeline therapy, it's putting someone in a state of trance. It's like light hypnosis because we're speaking directly to the subconscious. And the conscious mind gets in the way. Like one of the things is to uh, work through all of the different emotions. This isn't a PTSD exercise. This is just like an emotional release exercise. So kind of warm up and we'll start with anger, right? And one of the things that I'll lead someone through is like, when is the first time that you first experience anger? If you were to know, was it before, after your birth? And what someone would do that's not like prepped in this, they'd be thinking about it and be like, like how would I know if it was before birth? I wouldn't know that, right? But it's just like trusting. What's the first thing that comes through? Before. Okay, great. Was it genealogical or past life? Past life, great. How many past lives ago? Seven. And it's just the first thing that comes through. And then as soon as the conscious mind comes in trying to make sense of it, then you're gaslighting yourself and you're blocking yourself. But learning to work with your subconscious is just about building your intuition and trusting that.
Wow, because I mean, I think it gets a little difficult with when trauma is really, it's just kind of clouding that I don't know, that network of knowing, I feel like, because trauma and that's I think maybe that's why psychedelics for me, because breath work, I was just like, and even meditation, when I would sit, I talk about this a lot, when I was doing yoga before I sought out help for or treatment, I would literally do the yoga and then during um what is it called, the po when you're, what was that?
Shavasana, the
Shiva,
pose.
yeah, the Shavasana, when when you're just when you basically you're integrating it and you're supposed to be meditating and being you're still. My mind would be like, okay, what do I have to do today? What is on my list? And I did not see the importance of it. I really didn't. I just didn't know until I went into treatment and we did yoga and then we talked about it. And I was like, wow, I didn't realize, that that was probably the most important part of my yoga practice whenever, it's not just about stretching and um, exercise, but it was meditation and integrating that. Um, so I know that, even for me, breath work, I didn't even see how important it was until I was able to kind of peel back a lot of the trauma because I feel like for me, it was just trauma on top of trauma on top of trauma. Um, and it was the psychedelics I felt was powerful. I don't know for me, I probably could have gotten there if I wasn't gaslighting myself, as you were saying. But I felt like the psychedelics really helped me um dive into my subconscious um easily. And even now, since I've done a lot of different journeys that I can meditate and dip into my subconscious pretty easily. And I feel like breath work would be just such a great practice to do, daily without psychedelics.
Yeah, I agree. The psychedelics help so much. And my point is more like for some people that maybe it's psychosis or whatever it's something in their family or they just don't feel comfortable, whatever the case is, there are other paths. Psychedelics, I think, are the fastest and most effective modality and utilizing kind of like what I was talking earlier is a great integration for psychedelics. So either way, I would still do it. Well, I could talk forever about yoga. I'm a yoga instructor and I'm so passionate about like how there's 8 limbs to yoga and the movement's just one of them. And what's really cool to learn too is like specifically in like a Western yoga class, the reason why we do those movements aren't to get into good shape. It's to lie there in Shavasana with no thoughts. Like movement helps us with that. And I think in mental and emotional health, something that's been really big for me in the past year is getting more into my body and somatics, and but not just that, like working out, like physical health is so important. I was going to say one more thing about the subconscious, but I don't remember, so it's probably not important.
Well, if it pops up, please share because I feel like you're providing so much knowledge and wisdom that, I really enjoy listening to what you have to say. So feel free to interrupt me if it pops into your head. Um,
I was going to ask you, have you seen the new Inside Out, Inside Out 2?
I did. Yes. Yes.
It's so good. Towards the beginning of the film, there's these different memories and experiences that the characters in Inside Out are working through, and they go like, this one goes there, that goes here, and this goes there. I was like, that's such a great representation of how the subconscious mind works, because in any given second, we're processing 2 million bits of information, and only 126 of those make it to our conscious awareness because of deleting, distorting, and generalizing. So what they're doing in that movie was deleting, distorting, and generalizing, and it goes based off of prior experiences. To your point, when we have trauma that's impacted our life so much, then we associate that thing with something else, and that's what's going in the unconscious. And when we clear that up, now we're making room for growth, because we're not just
Mm.
deleting stuff that's not important or just generalizing, be like, oh, this is associated to that, you know?
Right. That is a good point. And I didn't even recognize that. The movie itself is just phenomenal and I talked to my children because I went to the movie theater with them and I talked about different parts because internal family systems therapy is really what changed my life. And then moving into to psychedelics. So it's such a fascinating movie, and that is very interesting because it's like when I do psychedelics, it is clearing away kind of all of the unnecessary stuff. So I have room to really think about what's really important and grow and that and all of that. And you were part of Silicon Valley, a big part of Silicon Valley, and I know that in Silicon Valley, psychedelics is also a big thing. At least that's what I've read. I'm not a part of that world. And, do they consider themselves psychonauts? Like, you know, or is
Yeah,
just for personal growth or?
I don't really know. I moved out of Silicon Valley in 2019 after I did ayahuasca to Santa Cruz, which is about an hour away. Then the pandemic happened, and I started to, go deeper and deeper spirituality. But in my time of growing up in Silicon Valley and having the beginning of my career there for the first 10 years or so, what was really fascinating around like when the time I peaked around 2017 to 2019 was there was a show on HBO called Silicon Valley. And yeah, you've
Hmm.
seen it, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and I used to get so worked up over that show, being like, this isn't real. This isn't what it's like. Because my buddy and I started a podcast in 2017 called What Up Silicon Valley. And we were chairing a young professionals group in the South Bay, San Jose, like near where the Niners play, south of San Francisco. Because true Silicon Valley is like San Jose, Santa Clara, which is south of San Francisco. But these days, people think of like, Mountain View, Google, and San Francisco tech companies and all of that. So, when we started that podcast, we were actually writing a script before we even knew there was a show called Silicon Valley, which it was kind of like Dumb and Dumber, Judd Apatow type humor. And it was
Hmm.
two guys recently graduated from college that moved from a rural town to Silicon Valley, looking at like LA, like the glitz and glamour, and we're going to make it big in our careers out here. And then they kind of fall on their face, and it's a coming of age story. But that was
Hmm.
much more my experience of Silicon Valley. It was like the everyday people that you would meet, small business, things like that. Sure, I networked. I put on with my friend and our team. we had an annual event at eBay's headquarters called Pitch Tank, which was our event, our version of Shark Tank, and it was a live event where we were working with three judges, about seven companies pitching, like 20 vendors, 300 attendees, alcohol involved too. So like a lot of moving parts. So, and we're connected with different tech companies. But even going back to that, like psychedelics were just not in my awareness. I loved mushrooms in high school and college, but at
Hmm.
that time, being, late 20s, early 30s, I considered myself a professional. And my vice was drinking. I didn't even consider psychedelics until a friend told me about microdosing with psilocybin in 2018, and that's what started it all for me. He sent me an article about Silicon Valley executives microdosing for with psilocybin. And as much as I loved mushrooms and whatever else, other extracurriculars when I was younger, I was like resistant to even microdosing. But then once I did, I noticed all these changes and benefits, and that was kind of my gateway into mindfulness, meditation, and
Wow.
breath work and ayahuasca and everything else.
Do you feel that not just for healing, but that psychedelics, not 5-MeO in particular, um, but can be used for growth and development? Because I do microdose, and when I go to a concert I may take a little bit, um not a huge dose, but maybe like a microdose of LSD, or even a middle dose of LSD, and I do feel that it helps. It helps me stay more present. And I don't drink alcohol. If anything, I don't really drink at all. But I was just wondering, do you feel that there's this personal growth? Because a friend of mine asked me, she was like, we were on a girls' trip, and she was therapizing everybody. And I was like, "Ooh, therapize me," and then she's like, "I don't know if I can." But then she's like, she kind of asked about, like the drug use or the psychedelic use, and I was like, "Ooh, that's a very interesting question. Like, is it, I don't feel like I need it. I never feel like, oh my God, I really need it. But I do feel like I can take it to feel like more present. Do you feel like that is out there for people, or do you advise against it? What are your
Yeah,
thoughts?
great topic. I love this topic. It resonates with me so much. I think for me, the way I've spoken about psychedelics and even like breath work, nervous system regulation, breath work journeys, so much of it, like if I had to put a percentage on it, has been like trauma based, and it's been big a big emphasis for me over the past couple of years to move away from such a strong emphasis of healing and to like growth and expansion. And that is a direct representation of my journey. And what's fascinating now that I'm a master practitioner of NLP, neuro linguistic programming, is in NLP, it said that there's four requisites for change, for transformation. Number one is release work. So that's what we're talking about when we say healing and everything else, right? Number two is setting goals. Number three is acting on those goals. And number four is being mindful of your thoughts and feelings on a daily basis, basically said integration. So as you're mentioning that, I'm like, oh, that's exactly what NLP teaches, right? Like you gotta release first. So I think people are different. Like I have several friends where they'll come over here and we'll have like a mushroom day. And still to this day, I go straight to anxiety. And I'm like, I need a few minutes to do some breath work to move through this. And the two friends I can think of, that usually I'll do this with, they go straight to bliss land every time. They're always happy and bubbly and whatever else. So, it's an ongoing basis, which is why I talk about the breath process, because science teaches us we can process our emotions in as little as 90 seconds if we allow ourselves to feel it. So if you go into this with the intention of working with psychedelics or microdosing with psilocybin or LSD for performance related expectations, yes, 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 yes. And that's not to say you won't have to do a little bit of shadow work to get there first, you know?
Mhm. Wow. Very, yeah, thank you smart. So thank you so much for that because I feel like I get to it gets me to a place where I can look inward and really feel like how like really understand what's happening in my body and like feel the music versus like being in my head. And so I think that's kind of where how I like to go with it because it is I feel like there was a point where I was always in my head. I kind of lived in my head for so much of my life. Like that's what was my reality, whatever I created in my head, right? It was my own personal reality. And I do think the psychedelics have got me out of, you know, things that I'm assuming of my external world and really understanding what was happening inside of me and moving through that. Um,
Absolutely. Yeah.
yeah. Well, I do want to ask, is there anything that you would like to add? You provided me with so much information. I'm really, really grateful for that. But yes, is there anything you'd like to add?
Well, I appreciate you having me on the show, and I'm only going to received, and I'm only going to provide good information based off of the line of questioning you're doing. So, appreciate such a great host. Yeah, my Breath Club is completely free now, so that's super exciting. It used to be $50 a month, but in relationship to my goals and really wanting to support people, I decided to make it free. It's an online community, online course as well, and weekly calls where there's shares along with being guided through breath work. So yeah, it's just called the Breath Club, and that's my free online community if anyone wants to join or check it out.
Well, amazing. Thank you. I'll be sure to check it out because I do feel like I need a little bit more breath work in my daily life. So thank you again for joining me today.
Thanks, Laura Lee, so much. I appreciate you having me.
Absolutely. That was Sam Kabert, certified breathwork practitioner and author of the #1 best-selling book, Soul Life Balance. For more information on Sam and where you could purchase his book, Soul Life Balance, go to samkabert.com or you can find the link in the show notes. January's issue of Authentic Insider is out. Sam actually contributed a piece in August and September's issue last year. So check out Authentic Insider at traumasurvivorthriver.com. That's traumasurvivorthriver.com. You can find past issues of Authentic Insider and find past issues of a Trauma Survivor Thrivers podcast. If you haven't already, please subscribe to my email list and to get Authentic Insider magazine in your inbox monthly. Join us next week when I speak with Dr. Beverly Armento when we discuss the impact of mentors. You've been listening to a Trauma Survivor Thrivers podcast on Mental Health News Radio Network. I'm Lori Lee Binstock. Thank you so much for being a part of the conversation. Take care.